All right, so today we're diving into something pretty cool, something that shows just how much complexity can come from some really simple rules. We're talking about swarm intelligence, and for our listeners who love getting into the nitty-gritty of science, this is going to be right up your alley. It's where biology meets computer science in a really fascinating way.
Yeah, absolutely. We're basically going to unpack how these systems think. Ant colonies, flocks of birds, how they pull off some amazing feats without any kind of central control, like a leader calling the shots. And we'll see how we can actually mimic that in artificial systems, too. Super interesting stuff, really at the heart of artificial intelligence and how it intersects with nature.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the basic idea here is surprisingly intuitive when you think about it. You've got all these individual agents, each one just following a few simple guidelines, and boo, you get this complex, almost intelligent behavior emerging from all these tiny interactions.
Exactly. It's like no single ant is designing the most efficient route to the food source, but somehow the colony as a whole figures it out. Same with bees building their hive, or birds flying in perfect formation, or fish moving as one giant fluid blob. All these examples of swarm intelligence in action. And it's kind of mind-blowing how all that order emerges from all these independent individuals just doing their own thing.
It really is. And before we really dig into this, I think it's helpful to clear up a few related terms. We've got swarm robotics, where we're specifically talking about applying these principles to, well, swarms of robots. Then there's the broader field of like swarm intelligence algorithms, which can be used to solve all kinds of problems. And then there's even something called swarm prediction used in things like forecasting.
Totally. So what we're going to do today is, first we'll break down those fundamental principles that drive these behaviors, both in nature and in the systems we create. And then we'll highlight just how many different ways these principles are being put to work. And you'll be surprised by the range of applications. It's broader than you might think.
Okay, so let's start with how we actually model this swarm behavior, how we can even begin to understand it in a computational way. One of the classic models, and this was a real game changer back in 1987, is called Boids, developed by a guy named Craig Reynolds.
And what's so cool about Boids, what really makes it click, is its simplicity. It's an early artificial life program, and it simulates flocking, birds flying together using just three basic rules. Each individual Boid just follows these three rules, and that's it.
Okay, so what are these three magic rules?
All right, so rule number one is separation. Basically, don't crash into your buddies. Rule number two is alignment. You want to try and steer in the same general direction as everyone around you. And lastly, cohesion. You basically try to move towards the average position of your local group, kind of like aiming for the center of mass.
So just those three simple things, and you get a flock.
Yep. And what's even more amazing is that you get a really realistic flock. They move all fluid and coordinated without any kind of central command telling them where to go. And you can even build on this, adding more rules to create more complex behaviors, like having them dodge obstacles or go towards a specific target. But the key takeaway here is that from just these simple local interactions, you can get this incredible complexity at the global level. It makes you think, right, how many other systems out there work like this?
Absolutely. It really highlights how much can emerge from simple interactions. Now, you mentioned another model called self-propelled particles, or the Vicsek model, which came out a little later in 1995. How does this one differ from Boids?
So the Vicsek model, or SPP, takes a slightly different approach. In this one, all the particles are zipping around at a constant speed. The main difference is how they change direction. Instead of actively trying to reach a center point, they align their direction with the average direction of their neighbors, those within a certain radius. And what's interesting is that there's often a random element thrown in, just a little unpredictable nudge in a new direction now and then.
So it's still all about local influence, but with a bit more unpredictability built in.
Exactly. And one of the cool predictions that has come out of these SPP models is that even though different swarming animals are, different, they might actually share some core properties at the group level. And it's become a big challenge in theoretical physics to figure out how to model these universal behaviors, these things you see across all these different scales in nature. It's like trying to find the fundamental math behind swarming itself.
That's pretty wild, trying to crack the code of how a flock of birds and a school of fish, so different, can both move so cohesively. Now, these models are fascinating on their own, but they've also inspired a whole bunch of problem-solving algorithms, right? The so-called metaheuristics that are based on swarm intelligence.
Absolutely. Once we started understanding these natural principles, it was natural to ask, can we use these ideas to solve problems, to make computers smarter? and that's where metaheuristics come in. These are basically high-level strategies for problem solving. Now, they don't guarantee that you'll find the absolute best solution every time, but in practice, they're really good at finding solutions that are very close to optimal, especially when you tweak their internal settings correctly, what we call the parameters.
So they might not hit the bullseye every time, but they're usually pretty darn close, and they do it quickly. And swarm intelligence has given us some really innovative metaheuristics. One that comes to mind is ant colony optimization, or ACO, which goes all the way back to 1992.
ACO is a great example of bio-inspired computing. It directly mimics how real ant colonies find the most efficient paths. So imagine you have these artificial ants, which are basically little computer programs, and they're exploring a parameter space. Now, this might sound kind of abstract, but think of it like all the possible routes a delivery truck could take. As these artificial ants explore this space, they leave behind digital pheromones, which are like markers that indicate the quality of the solution they've found along that path.
So it's like leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs, but these breadcrumbs also tell other ants how good the path was in terms of solving the problem.
Exactly. So later on, other ants are more likely to follow paths with a lot of pheromones, because that means those paths are probably leading to good solutions. This creates a positive feedback loop, where the whole colony ends up converging towards optimal or near optimal solutions. And this makes ACO really useful for solving problems on networks, like figuring out the most efficient routes for transportation or managing how data flows in communication systems.
It's a pretty brilliant way of translating a natural problem-solving strategy into a computational tool. Now, there's also particle swarm optimization, or PSO, which came out around the same time in 1995. This one sounds like it works a little differently.
PSO is what we call a global optimization algorithm. Imagine a whole flock of potential solutions. These are the particles, and they're all flying around in this multidimensional space. Now, I know that sounds complicated, but think of it like birds searching for the highest peak in a mountain range, where the height of the peak represents how good a particular solution is. Each particle starts out with a random velocity, and they can communicate with each other, sharing information about where they are and what they're finding.
So they're not just randomly searching, they're actually learning from each other as they go.
Exactly. And as they move around, each particle checks how good its current position is. We call this as fitness, how well it solves the problem. Over time, each particle changes its direction based on two things: the best position it's found so far, and the best position found by any of its neighbors.
So they're learning from their own experience and also from the experience of the group. It sounds like that would help them avoid getting stuck in a solution that's good but not the best.
You got it. That's one of the big advantages of PSO.
Mm-hmm.
The swarm's collective intelligence, combined with this information sharing, makes it really good at avoiding those local minima, which are those solutions that look good at first but aren't actually the optimal solution.
Interesting. So then there's the artificial bee colony algorithm, or ABC, which was developed a little later in 2005. This one draws inspiration from, well, bees, obviously.
Yep. The ABC algorithm models how honeybees search for food. There are three main types of artificial bees in this algorithm. The employed bees, who are busy exploiting known food sources. Those are like our potential solutions. Then there are the onlooker bees, who hang back at the hive and get recruited to the best food sources based on the information shared by the employed bees. And finally, you have the scout bees, who go out and randomly search for new food sources when the old ones start to run dry.
So it's a continuous cycle of exploring new possibilities and exploiting the ones that seem promising.
Exactly. The algorithm uses positive feedback, so when a food source is really good, more onlooker bees get sent there to exploit it. But there's also negative feedback. So if a food source isn't very good, it eventually gets abandoned, and the scout bees go off to find new ones. This balance between exploration and exploitation is a crucial part of what makes this algorithm so effective.
It's amazing how nature has already figured out all these incredibly efficient strategies. Now, you mentioned something called artificial swarm intelligence, or ASI, which is a bit more recent, from 2015. This one's really intriguing because it involves actual human groups.
ASI, which is sometimes also called human swarming or swarm AI, is a really exciting application of these principles. It uses algorithms that are modeled after natural swarms, but it applies them to groups as humans who are connected through a network. The idea is to boost the collective intelligence of the group in real time. So imagine a bunch of people all trying to answer a tough question at the same time, but they're not just working independently. They're connected through a system that lets them interact and work together as a unified swarm.
So it's not just about combining everyone's opinions, it's about creating a smarter, more dynamic way of making decisions as a group. And you said there have been some pretty impressive real-world applications.
Yeah, definitely. ASI has been used to make surprisingly accurate financial forecasts, and it's even outperformed those prediction markets, like the betting markets in Las Vegas, for predicting sports outcomes. And maybe most importantly, it's shown a lot of promise in medical diagnoses.
Mhm.
When groups of doctors use swarming algorithms to interpret medical images, like chest x-rays and MRIs, they've been able to make significantly more accurate diagnoses compared to when they work alone or use traditional methods like majority voting. Even the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization has used ASI for more accurate famine prediction.
Wow, that's a really impressive range of applications. So we've talked about the models, the algorithms, and now some examples of how ASI is being used. But what about other ways that swarm intelligence is being applied in the real world beyond those specific ASI examples?
Oh, the applications are really wide-ranging and always expanding. For example, the U.S. military has been very interested in using swarm techniques for controlling large groups of unmanned vehicles. Imagine a whole fleet of drones working together autonomously to achieve a common goal.
Yeah, that brings up a lot of interesting and maybe slightly concerning implications for the future of warfare.
It definitely does. But on a more peaceful note, the European Space Agency has been exploring how to use orbital swarms for things like building large structures in space and for interferometry, where you use multiple smaller telescopes working together to create a much larger virtual telescope. And NASA is looking into swarm technology for planetary mapping, where you could have a bunch of small mobile robots exploring a planet's surface much more efficiently than a single large rover could.
That makes a lot of sense, especially for exploring a vast and potentially hazardous environment like another planet. And didn't you also mention something about nanobots and cancer treatment?
Yeah, that was a really forward-thinking idea from back in 1992. The idea was to use swarm intelligence to guide tiny nanobots inside the human body to target and destroy cancer cells. It's still very much in the research and development phase, but it shows the potential for really targeted medical interventions. And there's another approach where researchers have used stochastic diffusion search, an algorithm inspired by how ants forage for food, to help detect and locate tumors in medical images.
So, different types of swarm intelligence being used to tackle different aspects of the same complex problem. That's really fascinating. And it's cool to see how these fundamental principles are making their way into more everyday technologies, too.
Absolutely. Swarm intelligence is being used more and more in the Internet of Things, IoT, and intent-based networking, IBN, because it's so good at managing large, complex systems that don't have any central control. Think about managing a network of thousands or even millions of smart devices without needing a central command center to tell each device what to do. It's also proving to be really useful in data mining and cluster analysis, where it helps uncover hidden patterns in large data sets. And even in business management, people are looking to ant colonies for inspiration on how to optimize teamwork and workflow.
It's like once you understand the basic principles, you start seeing swarm intelligence everywhere, both in nature and in the technology we create. So let's look at a few more specific examples to really see how versatile it is. You mentioned ant-based routing and telecommunications. Can you explain how that works in practice?
Sure, this idea, which really took off in the mid-1990s, involves sending out artificial ants, basically little packets of control information, to explore a communication network. These ants randomly choose paths through the network, and they leave behind information about how well each path performed. This reinforces the paths that work well, making it more likely that future data packets will follow those routes. It's like the network learns organically which paths are the most efficient. And as we talked about before, another ant-inspired algorithm, stochastic diffusion search, has been used for figuring out the best locations for transmission towers in wireless networks.
It's really clever how the network can adapt and optimize itself like that. And then there's the use of swarm technology in crowd simulation, which has been huge in entertainment and art.
Yeah, this has been a game changer for creating realistic and complex crowd scenes in movies and video games. One of the most famous examples is the Massive software, which is used to create those epic battle scenes in the Lord of the Rings movies. This software could create hundreds of thousands of individual agents, each acting realistically based on simple rules. And the animated film Stanley and Stella In. Breaking the Ice used Boids to create the super realistic movements of the fish and birds. Even back in Batman Returns, they used Boids to make those swarms of bats look so real. It's a great tool for artists because it's relatively cheap and easy to use, and it can create some really stunning visual effects. And even Southwest Airlines has used ant-based simulations to figure out the best way to board passengers onto their planes.
So, from huge movie battles to getting people onto planes more efficiently, swarm technology is pretty versatile. And let's go back to human swarming for a minute. Those examples you gave earlier about medical diagnoses were especially impressive.
Yeah, the idea of creating systems that organize groups of people into human swarms has a lot of potential for making group decisions smarter. There was that study from Stanford back in 2018 that showed a big decrease in the number of misdiagnoses for pneumonia when radiologists worked together on chest x-rays using these swarming algorithms. They actually outperformed both individual doctors and the traditional way of just taking a majority vote. And a similar study from UCSF in 2021, this one focusing on MRI images, also found a big improvement in accuracy with ASI. This really highlights how powerful it can be to structure group decision-making in this way.
It's about moving beyond just combining individual opinions and creating a system where the group as a whole can become smarter. Pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Now, you also mentioned something called swarm grammars, which sounds a bit more abstract and theoretical.
Swarm grammars are definitely more on the theoretical side. They explore the idea of using swarms of stochastic grammars. Think of them like rule-based systems for generating patterns as agents that interact according to swarm intelligence principles. These interacting grammars can create and describe complex patterns, particularly in things like art and architecture. The idea is that the behaviors that emerge from these swarms of grammars could even help us understand how deep learning algorithms work, especially when you consider how these swarms might relate to the way neural networks are structured and function.
So it's about trying to understand the fundamental building blocks of complex forms and how they might emerge from these swarm-like interactions at a very abstract level. And last but not least, there's the whole world of swarmic art, which sounds really visually interesting.
Oh, it is. Artists and researchers have been experimenting with using algorithms like stochastic diffusion search, SDS, which is inspired by ants, and particle swarm optimization, PSO, inspired by flocking birds, to create new and often surprising drawings and images from input data. The cool thing is how these algorithms create a tension between the local behavior of the individual agents, like the birds trying to follow the lines of the sketch, and the global behavior that encourages exploring new and visually interesting areas of the canvas. Some researchers have even added something called attention to these algorithms, which lets the swarm focus on and add more detail to specific parts of an image. And because of the randomness involved, the algorithm generates a unique output every time you run it. There's also work being done on swarmic paintings that use SDS for choosing and placing colors intelligently. All of this feeds into a larger discussion about computational creativity and how to balance exploration and exploitation in artistic creation. There's even an art installation out there that explores how we can make engineered systems seem lifelike using these swarm principles.
It's amazing how these algorithms are being used not only to solve practical problems, but also as tools for artistic expression and for exploring the nature of creativity itself. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into swarm intelligence, what are the key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember?
The core principles are pretty straightforward. Decentralization, meaning there's no single leader calling the shots. Self-organization, meaning that complex behavior emerges from local interactions. And emergence, meaning that those simple local rules can lead to surprising intelligence at the global level.
And we've seen how these principles are being applied in a huge variety of fields, from making networks more efficient and creating realistic digital crowds to helping doctors make more accurate diagnoses and even creating new forms of art.
Exactly. It really makes you wonder if these simple local interactions can create such complex and intelligent behavior in both nature and our technology. What other seemingly impossible problems could we solve by thinking about them in terms of swarm intelligence? It's a field that's full of potential for future discoveries and applications, and I really encourage everyone listening to keep learning about it.
Thanks so much. I think our listeners will have a lot to think about after this.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff.